Dr. Jazz.
Dig in, Denman. I mean, you know, we mentioned Mark Dresser, and already since those records, I know you, so it's quite a long time. And then I started following your music as a band leader, and especially your composing, and I'm really obsessed also with odd rhythms and rhythms in general, in my writing. And when I heard your music, I was like, man, what's happening there? And what helps me that you have on your website your charts, so that's a beautiful thing, and really nice to see how you do that. And but I wanted to ask you, like, I listened to COVID Variations, and you've done the composition using the layers of time, and this is also again prominent here, kind of this mixed odd metered time signatures, juxtaposing them. But how do you approach, let's say, I listened just before we started to Din again, the first track on COVID Variations, and it's just fascinating how everything happens. And I wanted to ask you, how do you approach a composition like that? Where do you start? How do you start with which line, and how do you develop it? And
wow. Let's see. How did I do Din? Well, I'm not sure I can tell you specifically how I did that.
Or any general composition,
it starts with the idea of pulse fields, which is an idea I got from Charles Ives first. Actually, before I heard Ives, I was hearing, Elvin Jones and Tony Williams. Okay, and then I got into Ives when I went to school to study music, and so I heard about Ives, and then I heard about Messiaen and Ligeti, who are all people who, and also now I'm blanking on the name of the guy who wrote New Musical Resources, 20th century American composer.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
Early 20th century. It'll come to me.
Okay.
Anyway, and I guess it was from Ives that I first really got into the idea of pulse fields, and I'm attracted to that idea because I think partly because my mother used to say everything is related and I can prove it, and so I'm interested in making music. You look frozen to me now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm good. It's cool.
Okay. Sorry, I only have ADSL here, so we're going to go in and out probably.
No, we're cool. I'm also here, like country,
okay.
two countrysiders.
So as I said, my mother said, everything is related and I can prove it. That's because she was into something called gematria, which is not typical of the English language, but is kind of typical of Hebrew, for example, where numbers and letters have the same symbols. And so you can calculate the value of a word and find relationships that way. And I'm interested in making a music where you can come at it from any, if there's a bunch of pulses, you can relate to the whole thing using any one or more than one or the whole thing. So the idea is to hear it all together. And if you're just talking about pulses, then all pulse fields are palindromes, or what Messiaen called non-retrogradable rhythms. I don't know why he called them that rather than palindromes, because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so in addition to pulse fields, I get interested in other kinds of palindromic rhythms.
Yeah.
And so I'm always trying to generate those and figuring out what I can do with them. And I think that's how it started with Din. And Din is pretty close to a piece I wrote for Mark and Matthias originally, which is called MC, as in MC Escher, which is a piece where there are harmonic changes as well as
Rhythmic, yeah.
pulse fields or palindromes. And so this was a piece where I wanted to do that, but I didn't want to be really locked into chord changes, which I find sometimes somewhat confining. Of course, palindromes are pretty confining too on their own level. But anyway, so here in addition to the palindromic rhythms and the pulse fields, I added this kind of chromatic harmonic motion. And the idea after the head, which is quite long, is to encourage the players to explore that,
open up,
that zone. And in a perfect world, the listener can't tell when the composing stops and the improvising begins, which is not quite true in the recording we did, but it's not bad, And so that's what that's about.
So basically with you then it starts without noted paper. It's just like on a regular sheet. You would like kind of mathematically draw out the whole structure, or?
Well,
sometimes.
It's been a long time since I used a piece of paper to write music with, I'm afraid.
Sure.
I used to. I used to even have, pen and ink and write out my scores, on that translucent paper that smells like ammonia. I forget what it's called now, but I used to do that. But now I use Finale.
Sure. Yeah.
I started out using Sibelius, but then Sibelius was bought out and they stopped maintaining it. And so I said, okay, well, I guess I better learn Finale now. And so I learned Finale, and I make a template using these palindromic rhythms.
Oh, okay.
And then I start, put several layers of them, and then I figure out which ones will go well with this kind of harmonic idea that I have. And so that's how that happened.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much how it happens. I make these templates, and then I start extracting from the template and improvising on it and seeing where I end up.
Yeah, well,
it's hard to know which in a given piece, which part of the process I start with, but the template is usually part of it. It's not quite a system, but it's like a set of guideposts, I guess.
Yeah. How much freedom is there within a tune then? I mean, if you give this music to the musicians,
in the written part, there's no freedom at all for the most part.
So you want it
it's the head is through composed. And in some pieces, some people are reading and others are improvising, kind of like Duke Ellington's orchestra, I guess. And in some pieces, it's completely free, and in some there are composed segments that the players can choose to introduce and then drop, and then there will be one that represents a cue to go on to the next set of segments to be played and or improvised upon. There's one. Let's see. Some of my bigger works are typical of that kind of work.
Yeah, interesting.
But there's a lot of reading, and I have to admit that I'm more and more interested in composing and not so much interested in free improvisation anymore.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay. How come?
I'm a control freak. I don't know.
Now it comes out, right? That's it.
Improvising starts to get predictable for me. I mean, maybe it's just my own improvising, but when I listen to a free improv concert, I wait for the good moments, and they come and go, because composing is hard enough, not in real time, okay, but to do it in real time is a huge challenge. And if I had like Sun Ra, if I could buy an apartment with 10 rooms and have everybody live there and play together 8 hours a day for 20 years, and that would, we would really get to a place where we could do that together. But we don't have that. I don't have that luxury.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, not that Sun Ra was ever very wealthy. I doubt he ever was. But he was some kind of a guru where he could get people to come and spend their lives with him, like they were married or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Beautiful thing. I love what they did.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting what you said, because, I also have these moments sometimes when playing that where, especially improvising, for me, it's easier to improvise within a context of a composition, like even free improvise, have a complex hat. I love that. And then just go into explore and again, grab onto something, because it makes more sense. Like complete free improv for 1 hour, it can be really repetitive, like you said, I guess also. So
yeah, I went to see a documentary film last week. There's a drummer I know who lives in Montpellier whose name is Denis Fournier. We made an album together of total free improvisation, and it's really very good. I like it a lot. But some people during the pandemic, during the confinement, which was very severe in France, he decided to make a solo album, and he met some filmmakers who were willing to film it,
Okay.
And so there were segments of him playing the music that would become the album, and segments where they're sitting in the studio listening back, and segments where they're shooting the breeze, with the engineers and other people who showed up, and the producer of the record and so on. And at one point, Denis said, I don't think that any free improvisation can be more than 20 minutes long. It's outside the human capacity. And there was a Q&A afterwards, and I wanted to ask him that. But he also, there was in the music, there was some text that he was speaking, sometimes. Yeah. And so I asked him, was the text also improvised, or was that written? And he said it was written. And then I didn't get to ask the other question, which is, why do you think 20 minutes is the upper limit for a human improv? What do you have to say to John Coltrane, or Cecil Taylor, whom I've seen free improvise for an hour and a half,
Yeah.
So I don't know.
No, but it makes sense. It's tough to.
Oh, the other point I would
maintain,
make is that free improvisation, I don't think it's really free. We all come to it bringing with us our chops and our vocabulary and our thoughts about what music should be and where it should go. And to me, the best so-called free improvisers are the ones who are, they're not just letting things flow out of them. They're thinking about it. Like, what just happened? What is happening? What will happen? Should I steer it this way, or should I hold my ground? This guy's going there. Should I go with him, or should I stay behind? Should I try to make him go over here? And what if I fail? All that's all happening all the time. So why not plan it ahead rather than wait for the moment?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you this. You kind of answered it now with this, but yeah. How to decide where to go in free improv and what's right and what's wrong, and
right. And we,
heavy choices
maybe some people who have written books about free improvisation have expressed the same thing. I'm afraid I haven't read many of those books. Who's the English guitar player who wrote a book about?
Derek Bailey. Yeah.
Derek Bailey, right? He wrote one. Have you read that book?
No, not yet. Unfortunately, okay. I'm really ashamed, but I haven't yet.
I thought you were a guitar player, man.
I know, man. I have so many albums of Bailey, but I haven't read that one yet.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan, I have to admit, of Derek Bailey. To me, he sounds very much the same all the time.
Yep.
And which would be okay if I liked what he did more, but I don't really like it so much. Cecil Taylor, I never get tired of listening to Cecil Taylor, although I pretty well know what his licks are. He's got his licks.
Sure.
He's got his rap, which contradicts his licks, or which he's not completely, in my opinion, not completely truthful about where the stuff is coming from.
Yeah.
It comes from a deeply considered, organized, rehearsed, practiced place. He's worked it out. It's not just coming from the heavens, or it's and yes, of course, there's inspiration, but there's also a lot of work.
Oh man, yeah,
behind it.
Yeah, for me, it's sometimes a problem when doing. We're in our tour, and I guess yesterday the tune went into this zone, and then it was a good zone, and then tonight on this gig, when I was younger, maybe not anymore now. I learned not to do it, but like I wanted to go again into that zone, and some players were just like, "Fuck it, no, I'm not going there." Like with Malaby, we played with Tony, we did some touring, and it was an amazing, first gig. We go somewhere, and the other night, I was like, yeah, okay, my thoughts back 10 years ago, okay, I'll go there, and he just didn't play, and I was like, man, what's happening? Is it? And then you realize, well, it doesn't have to go always. Then we can create a different zone, and
right.
But I guess
that's part of the interesting dynamic of a free improvisation. Somebody's going there and you're not, and so what do I do?
Exactly.
do I capitulate, or do I, keep fighting?
Yeah.
I actually saw Tony Malady play about a month ago.
Yeah, he was in France, right, with Rainey, and
he was in France. And I went to Avignon to hear him play with Angelica Sanchez and Tom Rainey, and it was a completely free improvised concert. It was great. I mean, they were amazing together.
Yeah, they're killing. Yeah.
And he especially, he's an amazingly lyrical player.
He's Tom also. I mean, I played with Tom many times, and I'm just always surprised. He could just play a snare drum for 10 minutes and it would be amazing. I was like, man, how do you do that? Like without overplaying, but still playing. And
I once saw Dennis Charles do a concert where he had just a snare drum and a cymbal, one snare and one cymbal.
Oh wow, man!
And he was killing.
Yeah,
which is not to disparage people who have a big set.
No, sure.
Denis Fournier for his solo album. I mean, he had a drum set that was filled the entire room. He had, and he used it all and very creatively.
Yeah. But then I wanted to ask you. You mentioned Cecil, and you mentioned Charles Ives and Alvin, for that matter. Like, where were you in mid 60s, or I guess late 60s? What was the moment, the decisive moment for you to do that switch for improv or jazz, or which album or concert?
Well, I started taking piano when I was 5. My mother claimed that she heard me playing the Minute Waltz, improv, which is highly unlikely, right? I couldn't play. I guess she heard me go da 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 da. That was it. Oh my God, I've got a genius. So she gave me lessons, and then when I was 11, I had a little pocket money, my allowance or whatever, and I went to the local 5 and 10 cent store, Woolworths as it's called in America, and I bought an album. I bought the album because there was a picture of a strange looking man on the cover, and I'd never seen anybody like that. There was a black man with a hat like this and a goatee, and I'm like, what is this? And it turned out to be Thelonious Monk and Sonny Rollins.
Oh man.
And I was just completely bouleversé, as the French say, by this music. And I wanted to play that. So
wow. And
then I stopped taking piano when I went away to school, but I met some guys who were interested in playing jazz, and so I got into that. And then in college, I remember going to Boston to hear a solo concert of Cecil Taylor. I had never heard him play solo. I had heard a couple of his albums. Unit Structures is one.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Conquistador is another one. I love that music, especially Conquistador.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Especially Conquistador. But I went to hear him solo, and I was just another French word, ébahi, you know,
Speechless, yeah.
blown away by his energy and invention and lyricism and all that stuff together. It was just like, oh man, I want to do that, you know.
Yeah.
And then how did I find out about Charles Ives? Well, I went to Williams College, which is in Massachusetts, and it was down the road from Bennington College, where oh God, trumpet player who played with Cecil Taylor was Bill Dixon.
Dixon, oh yeah,
Bill
sure.
Dixon was teaching there, and Jimmy Garrison was teaching there.
Oh really?
You know, I never studied with Bill Dixon, but I studied with Jimmy Garrison.
Oh really?
And yeah.
How was that
so, like? Well, he used to give lectures in the chemistry lab, and he would stand on the, you know, the desk with next to the vials where they mix the chemicals and stuff, and he would, you know, talk about being on the road with Coltrane.
Coltrane. Oh man.
How he and Elvin were you know, getting drunk all the time and the other two were the straight men, you know. And then he would do a free improv on the bass.
Oh man.
Then he would talk some more, and then so that was part of it. And then he also, you know, directed an ensemble that I was a member of.
Oh,
so
good.
we would. Yeah, it was great.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, from the source. I mean, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I went to Cal Arts, where Buell Neidlinger, who had played with Cecil Taylor,
Yeah, sure.
with Dennis Charles, right, in the 50s, was on the faculty. So I learned from him more about jazz too.
Wow. Did you ever approach Cecil also about music, or?
No, I never did.
Never.
I never did. I should have. He lived upstairs in New York when I lived in New York. He lived on Chambers Street, and he lived upstairs from a filmmaker named Ken Jacobs, whom I knew. Ken Jacobs is not as well known as Stan Brakhage, but he's in the same school of you know, modern experimental filmmakers in the 1960s and 70s. So I should have gone upstairs and knocked on the door, but I guess I didn't have the courage to do it.
Sure.
I didn't know what I would say to him. I've sometimes imagined that maybe one day we would perform together, and he would play the keyboard and I would play the strings. But then I thought that probably wouldn't work. You know? So.
Yeah. You mentioned New York. How did you get involved in the New York scene? When did that start?
In the New York scene. Well,
yeah.
When I finished at Cal Arts, there was a faculty member who was a friend named John Bergamo, who's a percussionist. And he had a friend who ran a music department at a college in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so he helped me get a job there. One of the reasons we were friends is that we both had small children. I was an early breeder, you know, I had children. I had my first son when I was 23.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I needed to get a job. And so John helped me get a teaching job. And it was at Grand Valley State Colleges, which is still around. But there was a college there called Thomas Jefferson, which kind of was in deep financial trouble after my first year. And they offered me a second year at 25% pay, less pay. And I said, no, I'm going to New York. You know, so I went to New York. And
when was that?
I think that was in, let's see, 76.
Oh, already. Oh, wow. Okay.
And I think the first person I met in New York was a man named Garrett List, trombonist, who at the time was the curator at the Kitchen, which was an experimental music place, which still exists actually, but it was in Soho then, and it's in Chelsea now. And I think it was Garrett formed a band that I was in called the Charles Lee Redmond Trio. It was actually a 6 or 7 piece band. And Reese Chatham, guitar player, was also in it. And John Deek, bass player. And Michael Canick was the drummer, I think. Not sure about that. And Garrett's girlfriend, was the singer. I don't remember her name, I'm afraid. And I think it was through them that I found out about the Big Apple Circus. And that was the first year of the Big Apple Circus. And I played there. So that's kind of how I got to know New York musicians that way. And there were some people I knew from Cal Arts who had also moved to New York by then. And so we had a band. And so I lived in the city from 76 to 84 when I moved to the suburbs.
Oh, okay.
Lived in the suburbs for 35 years and then moved here in 2020.
Now, why did you decide to move to France, by the way? Because of COVID or was that?
No, we didn't really know that COVID was going to be a thing. I remember the plane we took to France, there was one man on board who was wearing a mask. And he was Asian. So I thought, oh, that's why he's wearing a mask, because he's Asian. They have a problem over there, right? The China virus, as Trump called it. We didn't know it was coming to New York. And then a week after we got here, the whole country closed down.
Yeah.
So that was weird. But we moved out of where we were because when we moved there, it was quite rural. And by the time we left, it was completely urban. The population had quadrupled.
Oh, wow, man.
Yeah. And so, we lived in a very old house. And because it was very old, it was on a very old road, which had become a main thoroughfare. And so there were trucks and buses going by all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
So we didn't want that. And we had owned a house in France for 20 years. And we're like, why do we have 2 houses? We don't need 2 houses. We can't afford 2 houses. So let's sell one. Well, which one should we sell? Well, let's go to where it's beautiful in the south of France. That was not a hard decision.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, the hard part was to be separated from our family. That's a whole other story.
Yeah. Did you find it also musically hard? I mean, Europe has been a mainstay for American musicians for years, so how was this adjust?
Yeah, well, I don't know about the Cevennes. Paris has been a mainstay. But fortunately, there are quite a few good musicians around here. And as you can tell from listening to COVID variations, there are some really good players.
Yeah, Robin.
Robin
is killing.
Man, he should be better known. He's great. And Scott, who I found out about Scott from Jeff Gautier, the violinist who lives in LA. And it was Jeff who had, what was his record label? Cryptogramophone. He founded the Cryptogramophone record label, which recorded Mark and Matthias and me. So that's how I met him. And when he found out I was in France, he said, oh, you should meet Scott, whom he knew. And Scott lives in Millau, which is 2 hours from here.
Okay.
But we started getting together. And then I met Samuel, the drummer, who lives in Nîmes, about 45 minutes away. Yeah. Because Robin gives concerts in his yard. And he was doing that even during COVID. And Samuel came one time and gave a concert, and I heard him play, and I went up to him and said, "Man, I want to play with you." So we made this band, a quartet. Yeah. And all during the confinement, we rehearsed pretty much once a week for quite a while.
Oh, beautiful!
And so and I wrote these pieces for us, and that's why the album is called COVID Variations. It's also a play on Goldberg Variations. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. But did you already come to Europe before, like in the 80s, like as part of touring ensembles or 90s? Or?
Well, the house we live in now, we bought 20 years ago. And we came here and I was still working, so we just came. I was teaching, so we came a month in the winter and a month in the summer kind of thing. and made money renting it out to French vacationers every year. And so I met some French musicians that way.
Yeah.
And as well as Bar Phillips, the bass player.
Yeah, he's down there somewhere, right?
Not anymore. He moved back to, I think he moved to either Arizona or New Mexico.
Oh, really?
I think
I
New
didn't
Mexico.
know that. Oh, wow. Didn't know that.
Yeah. But he used to live he spent 50 years living in next door to a church in the mountains.
Wow.
And I went there and visited him a couple times, and we performed together a couple times. And I met some other musicians through him that way.
Yeah.
So, you have to travel to have a scene here. But, I've met various French musicians. They're all over.
Yeah.
There's lots of good ones.
Yeah. I mean, especially in Paris, the scene. I played with many French musicians and so many incredible players. I mean, really.
Yeah, I haven't really hooked into the Paris scene at all. I'm in touch with a few people, but I never make it up there, or very rarely make it to Paris.
It's a long way.
Yeah.
But speaking of bass players, you mentioned Bar Phillips, and we mentioned Dr. Caligari before and Mark Dresser, and you guys seem to have like an incredible connection with Mark, and Forest Green was for a long time one of my favorite albums. Like I love the band is just Dave and Phil and Theo and all these guys. It's just also the combination of instruments that Mark chose is incredible. But I wanted to ask you, like, how did you meet Mark and become, how did you guys make this strong connection throughout the years?
I heard Mark perform at the Knitting Factory, the old Knitting Factory when it was on Houston Street, with Anthony Braxton, Jerry Hemingway, and Marilyn Crispell. And I had a cassette of myself playing solo in my pocket, and I went up to Mark afterwards and said, "Hey man, I'd love to play with you, check this out." And he did, and he called me and invited me to give a concert with him at a former public school called PS something. I don't remember whether it was PS1 or PS22. It was an old public school on 3rd Avenue in the East Village. And we did a free improv concert together, and it was really fun. And so then we started playing together regularly. I was living in the suburbs by then, but I would come into town and we would meet at the Greenwich House Music School and work out stuff together, mostly improvising together. And then he formed the band Forest Green and invited me to be in it. And then he formed the trio with Matthias and invited me to be in that. And then he had his septet, with Mike Serene and/or Tom Rainey and Rudresh Mahantapa and Michael Desson. And I was in that. And then he moved to San Diego. So, and now I live in France. So we don't play together much anymore.
Yeah, you did a duo also, right?
Yeah, we've toured as a duo. We've toured the U.S. as a duo, and we toured Asia as a duo.
Oh, okay.
That was fun.
So not Europe yet. Interesting. Okay, cool.
Well, did we ever tour Europe as a duo? No, I don't think so.
Oh.
Always as a trio. Sometimes with Matthias, and if one time Matthias couldn't do it, and so we toured with Michael Moore.
Oh wow, beautiful.
And another time we toured with Herb Robertson.
Oh man, wow, okay, amazing.
So it was all Mark was the leader of all those various trios.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love the stuff you guys did together. I mean, you seem to be really musically amazingly connected.
Well, he has this thing where he what is the name of it? There's a lutenist in Boulder, Colorado, whose name is escaping me, who has installed piezos in the neck of his bass to amplify what he calls the backside of the strings, which means the part above where he's touching the fingerboard.
Yeah.
Right. So he gets the complementary harmonic,
Yeah.
and he has a pedal that he can use to adjust the balance between those two complementary intervals. Right. For the benefit of those who don't know what I'm talking about, if you touch a string somewhere, then it vibrates on both sides, and you hear the side that the string player plucks or bows, but the other side is also sounding, so you can make music, that be heard. Yeah. And I do something similar in the piano, except that I don't have the control. I can't decide. I can sort of decide which side of the touch point is going to be heard by being close to one end or the other of the. Yeah. If I'm close to one end of the string, then you hear the long part and not the short part, because it's above the threshold, above the range of human hearing. Yeah. Right? But once you get towards the middle, then you hear both. And a lot of what I do is about bowing and sliding, just like a portamenti and arco, just like a string player would do.
Yeah. So
we have that, and Mark and I have that in common, and we work that to death. And also, we have a shared interest in polyrhythm.
Yeah.
I prefer to call it temporal harmony, because polyrhythm means that there's the rhythm, and then there's the counter rhythm, right? Whereas in temporal harmony, there's the hierarchy is gone, at least ideally.
Yeah.
I say ideally rather than actually, because we are so conditioned culturally to hear duple rhythms. Although, being Irish, I guess I shouldn't say that. I should say we're culturally conditioned to hear triple rhythms.
Yeah.
Now, don't the Irish say, why do you march in two? You've got, that means you're always on the same foot. Get over it. Anyway, so we have that. He had this piece called Digestivo, which was a blues, where the meter changes every bar. Mm-hmm. And then he wrote a companion piece called Aperitivo, which plays, it's also a blues, it's a similar game. And so, we've covered most of the parameters now, and we relate on all of those levels. So yeah. We found very quickly that we had a lot to say to each other and a lot to share. And the result was a very fruitful, long collaboration. Yeah, which I miss tremendously. We don't have it anymore.
I hope you'll.
I mean, we have it, telematically, and they keep saying that they're going to. They've laid fiber in the street in my little village, 800 people, but when I asked the neighbors, how soon do you think it'll be before they hook us up? And the guy said, oh, I don't know, 5 years. They take their time about getting things done around here.
Sure. Yeah. They hopefully.
At least some things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask you.
But once I get fiber, then I could start doing, telematics, and that would be great.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't have my piano here in the house. I did bring my piano. I have a Steinway O from 1918, which I brought with me to France, which I've had since I was 11. The same year that I bought Work, Thelonious Monk with Sonny Rollins. And since it wouldn't fit in the house, I put it in the local church.
Oh wow! Okay, interesting.
And my rent is to play for the services, and I have a key, which is this long, to let me into this church, which was first built in the 16th century by Protestants during the reign of Henry IV, when it was okay to be Protestant.
Wow! Amazing,
and then it was destroyed when there was a thing called the Edict of Nantes, passed by Henry IV, which tolerated Protestantism and other religions. Henry IV was one of the great leaders of France. And then apparently Louis XIV had a girlfriend late in life who persuaded him that Protestantism was bad. So he revoked the Edict of Nantes, and the church was destroyed, and the stones of the church were used to build the Catholic church in the village, right? And anyway,
Bizarre.
not to get into the whole history of France, but it's pretty intense. Anyway, so my piano is in the church, and most of the time I have it to myself.
Oh.
You know, the religious observance is on a steep decline in France, like many other places.
Yeah.
And so the congregation goes from one village to the other. Every town has a church, because back in the day, everybody went.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and now hardly anybody goes. So they share a pastor, and the pastor makes the rounds from one village to the other. So that means that except for 2 days a month, the church is my studio, you know.
Wow.
The acoustics are poor.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask you that. Yeah.
It has a high ceiling, and it's very echoey. But, you know, if I'm sitting at the piano and I put a cloth over the
cover.
thing,
The thing.
the cover,
Yeah.
I'm fine. So
amazing.
it actually works pretty well. I've recorded a solo album in there, which I haven't released yet.
Oh, okay.
Which is called Hyperpiano in Church.
Ah, okay. Wow.
And I played it for one friend who really liked it a lot. So I think I'm probably going to put it out.
Oh yeah, come
on Bandcamp.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's beautiful.
And I have performed in there with the same quartet that did COVID variations, but we had to confine ourselves to, you know, ballads, basically.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Because especially for a drummer, it's like, forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the decay time in there is about 5 seconds.
Okay. Oof. Okay. Yeah, for ballads, that's nice. I mean, for long notes, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, or, you know, it's just like the Taj Mahal.
Yeah. But no, I wanted to ask you about preparing, you know, Hyperpiano. I listened to Hyperpiano studies on your Bandcamp. So, you know, you named the tracks cassette boxes or whatever, what you used. And, you know, Cage started, of course, doing this, and many other players. But you started to use all these different things, like
there's the guy whose name I couldn't think of before, who wrote New Musical Resources, Henry Cowell.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Okay.
You know, he's the first guy I know of to. I mean, what was that piece he wrote? The Banshee, right? Where it's an inside the piano piece where he scrapes the wound strings with his fingernails.
Yeah.
Now he claims to be the first one to do that. You know, I rather doubt that. I think, you know, there were probably some dudes in New Orleans who were doing it long before he was. Yeah. You know.
What was the moment for you? When did you decide to start experimenting with this, and how did that happen with preparing the piano? And
well, I think marijuana had something to do with it. You know, I was bussing flatware in my dormitory, and I was walking by the piano, and I dumped the flatware onto the strings and started playing, and started sticking things between the strings. And one of my classmates, who at that point knew more about music than I did, said, "Oh, you should check out John Cage." You know, and I went, "Oh, who's that?" You know, and so he put me onto the Joshua Rifkin's recording of sonatas and interludes. I loved that. And then when I got to Cal Arts, I was asked to be in a band to perform a piece by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen called Kurzwellen.
Mm-hmm.
And that was with David Simons, a percussionist, Paul Taylor, an electronic musician, and Earl Howard, and Carl Stone. So we did that. And in Kurzwellen, it's called Kurzwellen, which is the German word for shortwave, because you're supposed to divide your time between shortwave and your instrument. And when you're on your instrument, you're supposed to imitate shortwave. And shortwave sounds between stations are like oscillators, you know, oscillators doing portamenti. And I'm like, how am I going to do that? Am I going to, you know, play chromatic scales really fast? That's not very interesting. So then I went to John Bergamo, who ran the percussion department at CalArts, and he had a dismantled glockenspiel, and he let me borrow some of the keys, and which I used as bows and slides, and that was the beginning of it.
Interesting. Do you still experiment what to use, like adding new stuff, or I did for a long time, but now I have a limited number of things. But yeah,
I have my copper bars, and the steel cylinder is the last thing I got, but it weighs a ton. And I made it weigh a ton deliberately because I thought maybe rather than have to reach in and press on it, I could just let it lie there.
Yeah.
I was wrong about that. So, I had it made in order to find out if it would work, and it didn't work. So I still have to manipulate it.
Yeah.
But I can roll it, which I can't do with the copper bar. So that has its advantages,
Yeah.
But to make this album that I just mentioned, the one called Hyperpiano in Church, I found some new ways to use the tools I already have.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always happen that I find new ways to do them, but it does happen.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And
looking forward to hearing it. I mean,
yeah, well, you've heard it all before, but in this case, it's I took a kind of Feldman-esque approach. I allowed things to go on for a long time, and that way I've found some subtleties that I didn't know I had in my repertoire.
That's good.
It's always fun to surprise yourself, right?
Yeah, sure, always. Beautiful. Then just one more thing, not to take more of your time, and I wanted to ask you, how was your experience with Leroy Jenkins? And
my experience with what?
With Leroy Jenkins.
Oh.
And
oh well.
How did you become part
that was
of
a beautiful thing, and he died so suddenly, and it was such a heartbreak to see him go, because we had a deep connection musically. I never really got to know him well personally, but when we got on stage together, it was really happening, And I was introduced to him by Rich O'Donnell, who,
percussionist,
like Leroy, is from St. Louis. And Rich was for decades the principal percussionist with the St. Louis Symphony under Leonard Slatkin. And he knew Leroy, and I got to know him because he ran a music series in St. Louis called New Music Circle, which at the time was one of the best paying gigs someone who makes my kind of music could get. And so I got that gig solo, and I gave a solo concert out there. And then Rich said, "Man, I'd like to make a band with you and Leroy." So it was Rich. It was Rich who formed the band.
Okay.
And then it was Leroy's idea to add Min Chao Fen.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the album that we made together.
What's the name of it? Art of Improvisation.
Right.
Yeah.
That was performed at the church on 35th Street off of Park Avenue in New York, which is the kind of the New York home of the AACM.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the church now. Probably says so in the liner notes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we played there, and that was recorded, and we played at this series called Cooler in the Shade, or Warmer by the Stove, which was run by Tom Buckner, who also does the interpretation series at Roulette in New York, and Tom Hamilton. Tom Buckner is a singer, and Tom Hamilton is a synthesizer player. So we played there a couple times, and we played in St. Louis, the New Music Circle. And then that was it. And then Leroy died, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting combination of instruments. It's really
actually the Cooler in the Shade and Warmer by the Stove concerts are also on my Bandcamp site.
Oh, really? Oh, I have to check it out then. Okay.
Yeah, because I got permission to post them from Leroy's widow.
Yeah. Did you record
I don't know if
those?
I don't know if they were married, but they lived together.
Did you record concerts in the past? I mean, do you still have like footages from gigs or?
No, those are the ones we have. We have
Okay.
from that series
Okay.
that the two Toms curated.
Yeah. Okay.
And those are on Bandcamp. They're not great recordings, you know.
Gotcha.
I did the best I could with them using Audacity, which is
Yeah,
the only
sure.
editing software I know how to use.
Yeah.
So I never, Finale's hard enough, you know. I don't need to learn Pro Tools, you know.
Yeah,
I don't have
stuff like
time for that.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Great.
Amateur tools, as some people call it.
Yeah, well, I think it's good enough. I learned Sibelius. I learned some audio tools like to master the albums I make and mix them. It really helps to save up the money, you know, so that at least you go to record somewhere or something, and then I have the tracks and I can mix it, you know.
Mm.
It's quite a, especially nowadays, a money saver, you know, when it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Recording is almost like a hobby or something. Bizarre.
Yeah. Well, who was it? Charles Ives said, pretty soon everybody will make, you know, have their own stuff. He, you know, he was like an early version of Andy Warhol. In the future, everybody will be famous for 15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, but cool, Denman. Thanks so much for sharing some of this stuff. I mean, I appreciate it.
I enjoy talking to you, Sam. I'd like to get to know you more.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll interview you.
No, but if you ever
That's
come
good,
to Slovenia, come, you know, you're kindly invited. We have a
Dr. Jazz.